Well, good morning again. Welcome to the live in-person and live Zoom worship service of the Universalist Unitarian Church of Riverside. Our opening hymn this morning is number 21, For the Beauty of the Earth, from the Gray Hymnal. Feel free to sing as the Spirit moves you, but please with a mask on until otherwise decided. Please stand in body or spirit and join us in singing hymn 21, For the Beauty of the Earth. Thank you for joining us here in person, and thank you for joining us remotely by Zoom, where we will continue live streaming and posting these services on our YouTube channel for our virtual attendees. I am Tinka Friend, a member of the worship committee, and I will be your worship associate today. Other members of the worship committee you will hear include Alec Peck singing our hymns. And thank you, Margaret, this morning. And although you won't hear them, we also have Kate and Adam providing our technical support. Without them, you would not be hearing any of us. We welcome you to join us this morning with an open mind and open heart, but with muted electronic devices, please. So let me make sure I do mine as well. So, I invite you to leave your worries and defenses at the door and trust that what happens in worship is inspiring and powerful. Together, we affirm that this day and our being here together can make each of us braver, more compassionate, and wiser as we begin a new day and a new week. Although the doors are open, the pandemic is still happening. So while we are in the sanctuary, please keep your masks on while singing or chanting. And let's all take personal responsibility to keep both ourselves and each other safe. March is Women's History Month, when we celebrate the countless women who have fought tirelessly and courageously for equality, justice, and opportunities in our nation. We also reaffirm our commitment to advancing rights and opportunities for women and girls in the United States and around the world. In honor of Women's History Month, today's service will spotlight Olympia Brown from 1835 to 1926, the first woman to be ordained a minister in the United States, and you guessed it, a Universalist minister, and president of Wisconsin's Women's Suffrage Association for 28 years. Before we move into the service, there are a few announcements we would like to share with you. We will mention several websites, email addresses, and phone numbers. At the end of the service, we will leave up a slide with all of this information, and it is also available on our website. Sharing joys and concerns is one of the important rituals of our community, an opportunity to share milestones, losses, achievements, and accomplishments with one another. Now that our doors are open again, on the first Sunday of each month, we can both hear from those in the sanctuary and read the contributions that we have received. In front of the pulpit, there is a book where you can write your joys and concerns whenever you are in the sanctuary. For those of you at home, you can send your joys and concerns throughout the month to uuchurchofriverside@gmail.com. Our next Joys and Concerns will be on April 2nd, which also is Palm Sunday. And it's also the Sunday that when you will hear from me, the final sermon by Reverend Bruce Clear. It is The Christian in Me, and it's the third in his series that I have been sharing with you for the last 3 months. Very important announcement. Please remember to turn in your pledge form by April 2nd. And the Social and Environmental Justice Committee meeting is today in the annex following the service at 11:30. You can find the Zoom link and more information on the website under Social and Environmental Justice. And now I would like to invite Adam Wedeking, who is the chair of the Social and Environmental Justice Committee, to come up for a special announcement.
Good morning. The City of Riverside's Planning Department has created numerous historical context statements. And these historical context statements recognize the people, places, and events that are historically significant in Riverside's history to particular groups or aspects of history. So, for example, there is a Japanese American historical context statement in the city of Riverside that talks about the places and people and events that are important to people who are Japanese American in the history in Riverside. There's also a Latino historical context statement to talk about the things that are historically significant for the Latinx community. Right now, they are working on a historical context statement, an LGBTQ historical context statement that will highlight the people, places, and events that have been important to the LGBTQ community here in Riverside, possibly in order to create landmarks, that are special to that community. Yesterday morning, I was invited to breakfast at Erin Edwards, our city councilwoman's house, to have the first community meeting to talk about where these places are, what these events are, and who these people are. And we had a really great conversation. And that was a small invite-only stakeholders meeting. They're now going to have an open meeting for the community members to come and share their opinions on who and what should be recognized in this statement. And so I'd encourage everybody, I know our church and the people in it belong on that list. We have been important in Riverside and the LGBTQ story. And so I think it's important that we get recognized. Our church was mentioned yesterday morning as one of the places that needs to be brought up. And I think having people from our church kind of represent what that importance is would be really special. So they are having a community meeting It is a week from tomorrow, Monday, March 27th, 6:30 to 8 p.m. And it's at the Downtown Library Community Room. It is downstairs, the new library down the street. It's downstairs. The door sort of faces, well, at least is on the side of the building of
Where the
Mission
breezeway-
Inn. Yeah. Yeah, right on the side of the breezeway there, kind of go in on the side of Mission Inn Street there. Again, I think it's important that everybody and anybody who knows folks in the community who have been involved in that, who want to come and kind of give their input, really important that we get a lot of people there. So come check that out. I do also want to add, we're going to talk about a social justice committee this afternoon, is sort of expanding some of the homeless outreach that we do. And so I believe when you came in, there was a little slip with announcements. There's a QR code there you can scan to help donate to some of the continued homeless outreach that we're going to be doing here from the church. But also these flyers about the event, I did grab a couple of them at the breakfast I was at yesterday. So if you look on the desk as you're going out, you can grab one. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you for keeping us up to date about what's happening in our community that we can be involved with. And now I invite you to sit back, take a slow, deep breath as we move into the worship hour. You are welcome to read with me the mission statement of our church. Our mission is to foster a diverse religious community that celebrates life, affirms the individual, encourages spiritual growth and open thought, and works to advance social justice and environmental sustainability. We have two lightings of sacred flames. The first is the occupied Indigenous Peoples Remembrance Candle. The second is the lighting of our own chalice, the symbol of our faith. We walk upon the traditional territories of diverse and sovereign peoples, the original people of this land, who continue to cry out for justice and self-determination. This spot that we occupy was first the sacred space of several groups of Indigenous peoples, including the Cahuilla, the Cupeño, and the Serrano. We, the Universalist Church of Riverside, light this sacred flame as the stewards of this sacred and holy place. We are blessed with a space and opportunity to strive to live out our common principles, to bring justice, equity, and compassion into our daily lives, to resist all that threatens the earth and her people, and to be part of a world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. Let these thoughts carry us forth as we journey and worship together. Today's reading for the chalice lighting is adapted by Israel Zangville. Come into the circle of love and justice. Come into the community of mercy, holiness, and health. Come, and you shall know peace and joy. We have a tradition here at UUCR to welcome those who are visitors or perhaps returning after some time away. We know it can be uncomfortable to stand up and speak in front of others, and so I will now ask for a volunteer from someone who has been here a while to tell their name and how they found out about our church. So we ask you to step close to the mic and speak directly into it and clearly so everyone can hear. However, be aware that you will be visible on our Zoom camera and in the recordings of this service, which are posted online. So, do we have any church members who would like to volunteer? Thank you, Nick. Please step forward to the mic and tell us your name, how long you have been here, and how you found out about our church. 1996.
1996. Good morning. My name is Nick, and I am a Universalist Unitarian. I've been here since 1996. I was coming to a local concert that they were holding here at the church one evening. And it was very fun, and I enjoyed it. The church here was beautiful. I was a little put off by the stained glass window there with Jesus. But as we began to attend church here, I came to see that that was not an overriding factor to the church. And so we've been here for a very long time now, and I've enjoyed it enormously. And I got to do a shout out to Margaret. Hey, girlfriend. No relation to Tinka friend. Good to see you all this morning, and that's how it's done. Thank you.
Thank you. That's how it's done. So if you are new here, or a visitor, or even an old friend, please raise your hand to stand and come up to the mic in front of the pulpit to introduce yourself. Anyone willing to do that this morning? Is there someone online who would like to introduce themselves? Please raise your hand and we'll call on you by Zoom. So we're all old friends here. So for any new guests, please join us for socializing and coffee hour after the service. We would love to chat with you out in the parish room. That's the room that you entered into, where you can also find our visitors book. So please leave your name before you leave so that we know that you are here, and leave your contact information if you want to know about upcoming events. And we always have lots of upcoming events. For those online, the best way to get added to the mailing list is to email the church office at admin@uuchurchofriverside.org. Our hymn now is number 123, Spirit of Life, from the Gray Hymnal. Feel free to sing as the Spirit moves you, but again, with a mask on. Please stand in body or spirit and join us in singing Spirit of Life.
Of compassion
You may be seated. This portion of our service is to support our beloved historical church. This can be accomplished several ways. In addition to the weekly collection, you may send your checks to the church address, which is shown here. You may contribute by PayPal using the QR code, which is shown here, as well as on the church website and in the newsletter. Stater Brothers Market gives our church a rebate on Stater grocery cards, which we will have in church each Sunday. You get the full value, and the church receives a percentage for free. So please see our treasurer to purchase the gift cards. Right? Are we seeing you? Please donate as the Spirit moves you by whatever method works best for you. Thank you for your generosity. And to those of you who give of your time and of your talent, thank you for your generous care and attention. Will our ushers now please come forward to receive the collection? Our next hymn is 402, From You I Receive, from the gray hymnal. Feel free to sing as the Spirit moves you, again with a mask on. Please stand in body or spirit and join us in singing hymn number 402, From You I
From you I receive, to you I give, together we share, from this we live. From you I receive, to you I give, together we share, from this we live. From you I receive, to you I give, together we share, and from this we live.
Our reading this morning is by Olympia Brown, and it is actually in our hymnal. There are two readings from her that are in our hymnal. This one is number 569, and it's titled, Stand by This Faith. Stand by this faith. Work for it and sacrifice for it. There is nothing in all the world so important as to be loyal to this faith, which has placed before us the loftiest ideals, which has comforted us in sorrow, strengthened us in noble duty, and made the world beautiful. Do not demand immediate results, but rejoice that we are worthy to be entrusted with this great message, that you are strong enough to work for a great, true principle without counting the cost. Go on finding ever new applications of these truths and new enjoyment in their contemplation. trusting in the one God which ever lives and loves. Now let us pause for a moment of silence. The Reverend Dr. Jane Harzell Bowering died in 2014 at the age of 83. She had graduated from St. Lawrence University in 1952, which, by the way, is the same university that admitted Olympia Brown back in 1861. Reverend Bowering was ordained on January 30th, 1955 by the North Carolina Universalist Convention at the Universalist Church of Outlaws Bridge of Seven Springs, North Carolina. She served many Universalist churches until her retirement in 1996. Notice that she was ordained as a Universalist minister before the merger in 1961, and she continued serving Universalist congregations, both as a religious educator and as a minister. She believed it was important for children to embrace the message of a loving God. Jan valued her Universalist roots, as do I, from this church here, which was the first Universalist church built west of the Rockies in the congregation was formed in 1881. Jan served on the board of the Universalist Heritage Foundation, the Massachusetts Association of Universalist Women, and the Massachusetts Universalist Convention. She was mentored by Reverend Edna Bruner, and she was inspired by both Edna and Reverend Olympia Brown. She was known far and wide for her dramatic portrayal of Reverend Brown, and she offered this portrayal more than 40 times to congregations and assemblies throughout the United States. This morning, you will see her embody Olympia Brown in her elder years. As I was researching to write this morning's sermon on Olympia Brown, I saw this portrayal on the Universalist Heritage Foundation website, and I knew that I could not do a better job. And that's why I'm offering to you this morning her portrayal. On a crisp autumn morning in 1861, Ebenezer Fisher, the president of the Theological School of St. Lawrence University, heard a firm, authoritative knock at his door. On opening it, he was surprised to see a small young woman holding a suitcase. What he could not know was that this small, soft-spoken woman would become one of the most formidable forces in the American women's suffrage movement. She was Olympia Brown, born 1835, died 1926, a Universalist minister whose ordination we commemorate today. The first woman in the United States to be ordained by a full denominational authority. Brown dedicated herself to assuring that women could take their rightful place in the ministry and in every facet of American life. She was one of the very few original suffragists who lived to vote in the 1920 presidential election. So I present to you a look at her life as portrayed by Reverend Dr. Jan Bowering.
Olympia Brown lived during exciting and formative years of this country. She was a pioneer in the best sense of the word, from her birth in a frontier cabin, her passion for more and better education, especially for women, to her career as the first woman in our country to achieve ministerial standing recognized by a denomination. Her reputation rests also on her untiring work for the cause of women's suffrage. Her visit today coincides with an important event in the continuing protest. It is December 1918. The Great War has been over for about a month.
I am so glad to see a good crowd of you here this evening. It's exactly what I was hoping for, because everybody has said nobody cares, nobody's interested in working for women's rights. And now it seems as though there are some people who want to hear the story, want to hear what we have to say. I'll tell you, there's a great deal still to tell. You know, our president, Wilson, is over in France right now, and that man, and I'll use that term, that man, even if he is our president, he's bragging about what a wonderful democracy this is, a wonderful place for liberty, wonderful place when over half our citizens can't vote. I tell you, we're showing the people out there. On the park, outside of this building, I just came from there, we have a fire in one of the urns by the Lafayette statue, and we are burning President Wilson's speeches. Yes, that's what we should be doing. They handed me his speech that he gave in Paris, was going to give today, I guess he's given it, and said, you may put it into the flames, Olympia. You represent part of what we're talking about. And I stepped up. I needed a little help to get up on the stone base, but I got up there. I'm 83, but the point is I shoved it into the flames and I said, Mr. Wilson, I protest you're going to another country when there's so much work still to do in this country. I have been fighting for liberty for 70 years, and it's still not finished. Now, you may not believe that it's been 70 years, but I tell you, it happened when I was 13 years old. You see, my parents were, I can only call them real pioneers. They came from old Vermont. My mother was Lethia, my father was Asa. Their names were Brown. They were not related, but Brown was the family, a lot of Browns in that part of Vermont. But the point is, they were free thinkers. Universalist ministers had come through. They had no church, but they were circuit riding ministers. And these parents of mine thought for themselves, not just in religion, but in politics too. Anyway, it was a practical reason that caused them to move out to Michigan. They bought a farm that had been partly developed, and then the owner had moved on. And soon after their marriage, they put their possessions into an ox cart and walked all the way out to Prairie Run, Michigan, where they had bought this farm. My father cut some wood for the winter in their woodlot, put in a crop of winter wheat. My mother hung up muslin sheets to give a little privacy in the cabin, and there I was born on January 5th, 1835. 2 years later, my sister Oella was born there in that same cabin. And 2 years later, my sister Marcia, well, it wasn't Marcia. By the time she was born, my mother had prevailed on my father to build a house with clapboards on the outside. And they had 3 bedrooms upstairs, and downstairs they had a parlor and a sitting room and a kitchen, a big kitchen. And that's where we children grew up. And we didn't know that our lives were somewhat different from other children of that time. You see, my parents subscribed to the New York Weekly Tribune. They took turns reading the paper to each other, and then they asked we children what we thought about it. By that time, they had my brother Arthur, who was the youngest in the family. 3 children. And in that time when children were to be seen and not heard, we were invited to talk. The other thing my father did was build another cabin, and he put me on a horse, and we rode side by side on the horses and went around to all the neighbors. Now that Michigan had become a state, we had to provide education for the children. And he told all the neighbors in quite an area, you have to board the teacher for 2 weeks, and you have to provide $1.50. And they got enough of them, so the teacher got $1.50 a week during the school year and had a place to live and eat. But that wasn't enough. Eventually, when I got to be 12 years old, I needed more education. And so we went into Schoolcraft, Michigan. And that's where I learned the things that I'm talking about now. It was a good school. There were 4 teachers, but they were not treating us fairly. The boys got to make speeches. The girls had to be silent, or they could read their compositions. And when I thought this seemed, shall we say, unfair, I got my cousin Addison to speak up and say, why couldn't the girls speak and make speeches like the boys? And all of the teachers, all 4 of them, stood up and said, if Addison persists in this ridiculous idea, we will leave. I felt so sorry because I'm the one that had put him up to it. But the point is, they said, oh, well, I guess he was just having a little fun. And they all sat down and we went on, and they used the same rules in which the girls kept their mouths shut and the boys got to talk. But the point is, I learned it's a struggle. We've got the beginnings of a battle right here. Well, my years in Schoolcraft were good. I got a very fine education. It was equivalent to what I guess nowadays the young people would call a high school education. And the teachers changed from year to year, but finally I said, I need more education. I talked to my mother and father about it, and my mother said, yes, they do need more of an education. And my father said, the girls don't need any more education. They're going to get married. And we said, Father, do you see any young men knocking on the door and asking for our hand in marriage? And Father had to admit that it didn't look as if we were going to get married. And so we started looking for a place to get more schooling. And we found it in Mount Holyoke, Massachusetts. And there we had a chance to get almost a college education, even though colleges would not accept we women, we girls. We heard it was a fine school founded by Mary Lyons several years before. And so with one of the other girls from Schoolcraft and her father as a chaperone, we went off to Albany, said goodbye to him when he went on to New York, and took the stagecoach through the hills of western Massachusetts. Oh, it was a beautiful countryside. And the school, when we saw it, was very impressive. But oh my, the rules, they were dreadful. Young ladies may not speak above a whisper in the hallway. Young ladies may not look out the window. Young ladies must stay silent during study periods. Young ladies must do this, must do that. One thing, though, that pleased my father when he heard about it, he was a little skeptical about this idea of more education, but when he realized that the girls needed some education to be able to make their own living, he agreed that it was okay. The girls, and these were all students of all ages, most of us were in our late teens and early 20s, and we learned that we had to get up early in the morning and wring out a couple of tubs of bed linens that had been put to soak the night before. A few weeks later, we had to do breakfast, then we had to do cleanup. Once a week, we all cleaned the schoolrooms. The teachers worked too. It was a practical system, and we learned a good deal as well. We started a debating society. My sister Oella and I were pretty good at this sort of thing, so that we invited the teachers to come and hear us do a debate. And the teachers seemed impressed, but they left without saying a word, either praise or criticism. And at the end of the term, we were invited into the principal's office, and she said, "The debating society must be disbanded." I was struck silent. That's very unusual for me. But Oella spoke up, and she said, "Why? It teaches us to think for ourselves. It teaches us to be independent." The principal said, "That's just the problem. We don't want you to be any more independent. You don't need to think for yourselves. You have parents, you'll have a husband to think." Well, there it came again. You get a husband and then everything's taken care of. We didn't care for it, but there was nothing to do but go back to our rooms and disband the debating society. But worse was to come. You see, Mary Lyon had been very concerned about the reputation that her students would have. And at that time, of course, you had to be very religious. And while most of them came from homes that went to church and had various kinds of religious instruction, at school, they had a special event in the spring. It was like a revival, and they brought in preachers, most of them pretty conservative. At least Oella and I thought so, because we had had nothing but the kind of teaching that came from a saddlebag preacher. And of course, my mother and father, who talked about their own Universalist beliefs. But these preachers would come, and the teachers would do it too. They would prey on our emotions. The teacher would say, "Oh, Olympia, it would make me so happy if you would just confess your sins and say how wicked you had been and ask for forgiveness." I didn't really care for that. They did it to Oella too. They wanted them to say, "We have been saved and now we're better people." It didn't change us at all. It just made me feel very uncomfortable. I tried to get out of it. I never did confess anything, and I didn't think I had much that needed to be confessed. But when it was time to go home at the end of the school year, we knew we would not come back to Mary Lyon's Academy. And so Oella started teaching there in the schoolcraft area. In fact, she taught right back in the little cabin that our father had built on our own property. And she was making quite a career of teaching, but I wanted more. And so my mother and I planned, we found a day when my father had had a very, very good day as far as selling some of the products. And we cooked his favorite supper, which is always a very wise thing to do. And then after the meal, I walked into the living room and I said, "Father, I think I should talk to you about some more education." And he said, "Well, Olympia, you've decided what you want to do." And I didn't say precisely what I wanted to do. I wasn't quite sure, but I did say, I said, "Father, I need to go to a real college." And he said, "But I thought there weren't any admitting women." And I said, "Well, there are some, but they're religious schools, and I don't want to be preached at all the time." We had no churches in Schoolcraft. Again, just itinerant preachers. But he said, "Well, I guess that makes sense." And I said, "Besides, if I get a better education, I can get a job in a city school, and I'll have enough money to live on, and you won't have to support me for the rest of my life." That got his attention, you know. But the point was, I didn't know where I could go. But there were two that looked pretty good. One was Oberlin, and one was Antioch. Both of them were in Ohio. Now, I had learned that some of the women in Oberlin who thought they'd gotten a good education were so disappointed because at graduation time, they didn't have a chance to speak. They got a diploma, but they didn't speak at graduation. So I tried Antioch, and Antioch was the place to go. I was so enthusiastic about it that after less than a year there, my parents decided that they were going to lease the farm in school there near Schoolcraft and buy a house in Yellow Springs, and the rest of my family, the rest of the kids, the children, Oella and Marcia and Arthur, who gradually were coming closer to that time of education, could all have a chance, and they went to that school as well. And our home there in Yellow Springs was the center for all kinds of lively liberal discussion. Well, that was an important step forward. And one of the things that troubled me, they had wonderful speakers, a lot of them from the East Coast, but from all over the United States. And I said, they're all men. And so I went to one of the professors who arranged it, and I said, why don't we have women speakers? And he said, oh, my dear, there's just no one comparable, nobody that would be suitable. What you really need to do is just listen hard to these men who we bring in for you. And I said, no, I want to have a woman lecturer here at Antioch. And he said, well, my dear, if that's what you want, you'll have to take care of it yourself. And I said, all right, I will. So I went around and I asked my fellow students for some money. And they said, well, all right, yes, let's see what we can do. And we voted on who we might invite, and we finally found the right person in the person of Antoinette Brown, who was preaching in a congregational church in South Butler, New York. She had gone to Oberlin, she had gotten a good education, but she hadn't really been made into a real minister. The local congregation had ordained her, but she was a fine speaker. And she came, and it dawned on me, she's going to speak in the college hall on Saturday. Maybe she could preach in the chapel the next morning. The professor who had that day assigned said, no, I won't give up my Sunday for her. So I tried one of the local churches that had no minister, and I had to go and visit every single board member, but in the end they said, yes, we'll give her a chance. She had an overflow crowd in that church. But the important thing is that when she finished her sermon, her talk, I realized that this is what I had been looking for. And I said to myself, I want to be a minister. I want to be a liberal minister like Antoinette Brown. I didn't know anything about the problems of ordination. I just knew that that was what my career needed to be. And so I thanked her, of course, and I finished my schooling in Antioch, and we came home, and once again, my mother said, how are you going to bring the matter up to your father, Olympia? And I said, well, let's choose a good menu for tomorrow night, and I'll talk to him. So after we had eaten, it was a very good day. It was in late June, and I said, Father, I suppose you're wondering what I want to do next. And he said, well, yes, you have a teaching job in mind. And I said, no, Father, I've been thinking about it, and I've decided I want to be a parish minister. Poor man. It's lucky he was sitting down, because he looked absolutely astounded. And he said, but Olympia, who would hire you? He didn't know much about Antoinette's record, but the point was, he knew me, he knew I had ability, but he just couldn't see anybody wanting a woman for a minister. And so let me look around and see what I can find. Bless that man. He said, well, yeah, if you can find a school that will accept you to train for the ministry, I'll pay your tuition. Quite a man. Anyway, I wrote to an awful lot of places, and all of them said no. Well, actually, that's not true. A couple of very, very conservative fundamentalist schools said they would consider having me as a student. The Unitarian school in Meadville, Pennsylvania said, an interesting idea, but I don't think we're quite ready for it yet. And so when I got a letter from a little school, St. Lawrence in northern New York, in Canton, New York, I expected it to be the same thing. Sorry, Miss Brown, it's an idea, but we're not ready for it yet. Instead, Dr. Fisher said, Well, while I don't feel that women are called to the ministry, St. Lawrence accepts men and women on an equal basis, and if you would like to come, we will accept you as our student. Please send this and this and this and this. I was ready to pack my suitcases right then, even though it was only the month of March. Anyway, I went, and finally in September, I went to Canton. I left my trunk behind at the station, and I walked up the short distance and up the hill. The college was located on a hill, and when I say the college, there was one building. I had gotten a letter in June from Dr. Fisher, Dr. Ebenezer Fisher, and he said, I personally don't feel women are called to the ministry, but I'll leave it between you and, quote, the great head of the church. So I connected with the great head of the church, and we decided I should be a minister. But when I got to the building where his office was located, I realized he hadn't heard back from me that I had debated his requirement. And so I knocked on the door, and this very tall man came, and I said, Dr. Fisher? And he said, yes. And I said, Dr. Fisher, I'm Olympia Brown, and I've come to study for the ministry. Well, Miss Brown, I hadn't expected you. And I said, no, I suppose not. And he said, I thought my letter had discouraged you. Oh, no, Dr. Fisher, actually it encouraged me. I think that women are suited for the ministry, especially for working with parishioners, even if we don't perhaps preach as well as the men do. He recovered quickly. He opened the door wider. He introduced me to the other faculty members, all 4 of them, and they gave me a warm, warm welcome. Their wives were another matter. They said, what does she think she's doing here on a campus with only a male student body? The male student body included 9 young men. And I said, I want to learn to be a minister. And the women just sort of shrugged their shoulders and were very unfriendly, at least for the first 4 or 5 months. But the point is, the young men, some of them were fine. The professors were very, very helpful and gave credit where credit was due. But there were 2 of the young men that they crouched under my window when I rehearsed sermons and said, she doesn't really know how to perform as a minister should. Her voice is too high and wavery. I knew I had to do something to lower my voice, but the point was these young men were making me feel very uncomfortable. But gradually, I got better acquainted. At Christmas time, I couldn't go home because it was such a great distance, and so I preached over in Ogdensburg, New York. I've had a chance to preach in a couple of other towns. And as the year wore on, I realized that the Northern New York Universalist Convention was meeting in Malone that year, about 50 miles north of Canton. And I knew Dr. Fisher wouldn't propose me for ordination, so I decided I would have to do something myself. And so I took the trip up there, and I asked to be ordained. And they said, we will consider your qualifications, and we will tell you in a short time. And I went outside to wait. I didn't know exactly what to do, but I decided that if I wasn't going to have a chance to do this, I would find some other place to get some more education. But very soon they came back. And they said, Miss Brown, your qualifications entitle you to ordination. Let's set the date. And that was it. I was going to be a Universalist minister. I was ordained on June 29th, 1863 in Canton, and I went out and had a chance to do some preaching that very summer. One of the professors knew of a vacant church in Vermont, and I would have stayed perhaps longer, but my mother said, Olympia, I need your help. Your brother Arthur is sick with rheumatoid arthritis, and a different kind of rheumatism. Infectious rheumatism, I'm sorry. But in any event, Arthur was too much for Mother to take care of doing the home nursing. So I resigned and went and joined her in Ann Arbor, where Arthur was in law school. And when he got a little bit better, I went to some lectures, and one of them was by a man named Dio Lewis from Boston. And I went up afterward because he talked about women's gymnastics, I guess is the term. But I said, I wonder if the voice and the throat can be trained to be stronger like the rest of the body. And he said, certainly, Miss Brown, come to my gymnasium in Boston when you have an opportunity. So as soon as my mother could spare me, I went to Boston. Wonderful city. Had a marvelous time there. And I went and took courses. And he said, we can teach you to strengthen your shoulder and neck muscles. We can teach you to breathe more deeply, to lower your voice, to project it. He was right. I still do those exercises even to this day, and my voice does carry. And the other thing I did while I was in Boston, I went to the headquarters of the Universalist Church, and I talked to the minister, Alonzo Minor. Alonzo Minor was the head there. And he said, well, yes, yeah, I've heard of you. I've heard you've been ordained and finished the course at St. Lawrence, but I don't know. Oh, I know, Weymouth Landing. Very run down. They don't have enough money to keep the church going. Their minister was very much into spiritualism. I don't think the church is in good condition. I know the organ doesn't work, but why don't you try Weymouth Landing? And I thought, well, I guess it's a place to try. And so I was there for 5 years. It was a wonderful church. And I have a tendency to make churches that are tottering on the brink of disaster become stronger and more confident. And then, after that, I went to Bridgeport, Connecticut. And there I ran into some other problems because there were one or two men who didn't want a woman minister no matter what. And so they finally made the congregation so unhappy with my ministry, even though a lot of them were supportive of me, that I finally felt I had to leave. They didn't have any money to keep going. P.T. Barnum, the circus man, was a member of that congregation, and he gave large donations, but it just wasn't enough. The one good thing about that part, though, of my life was one of the members of my Weymouth church, John Henry Willis, had moved after I moved to Bridgeport, and he brought a new business in Bridgeport, and he set about, well, I guess courting me is the word. And my mother was very upset. She said, oh, you can't get married. You'll ruin all my plans for you after we worked so hard to educate you. And I said, no, Mother, he's supportive in all ways. And so I married John Henry Willis. And I kept my name, of course, Olympia Brown. But the point was, after a little over a year, we had our first child. And not too long after that, we had Henry Parker Willis, affectionately known as Parker. And then we had our daughter Gwendolyn. And so this was the family. And even if I didn't have a church, I got interested in my new special concern, and that was votes for women. And that's about where I came in, talking about votes for women. I went on to Racine, Wisconsin. I went on to different parts of the country to lecture and speak. But the point is, my husband and I had a fine marriage. And after he died, I tried to run the business myself. He had a publishing business in Racine, but it was very difficult. We didn't have quite enough money. I eventually sold it and went into work all the time for women's rights. But I did indeed have a chance to do some preaching in some of the small towns around there. And I eventually went to live with my daughter Gwendolyn, who taught at the Bryn Mawr School in Baltimore, and I could go into Washington and listen in on some of the hearings and speak up for women's rights and women's voting. But it was a situation in which it needed more, more concentration. As I said when I first came in, there weren't enough women who were going to drop everything else and work for it. It was a situation in which the women were more interested in what kind of a gift they were going to give to the outgoing president. And then, of course, I'm sorry to say that we women who were working for the vote split among ourselves. Some felt it should be done by states, and others felt it needed to be done in Washington. And so we wasted a lot of time. We also made the mistake of not talking to working women in the factories and on the farms. We also didn't get on good terms with the press. And so we took a lot longer to achieve our goals, but I think we're close now. I'm very close because we have learned, I'll tell you what we've learned just recently, and this is from Mrs. Pankhurst in England. She sent over some of the women who went and worked with her and said, you've got to stop being polite and ladylike. You've got to go out and demonstrate. You've got to use some kind of strong language. You've got to say, this is what we insist on. And now that the war is over, we have got to push hard. Actually, those women taught us a lot of good strategy, and it was necessary for us because we were too polite. Oh, strategy. Oh, my goodness. Oh, dear. I think I've given you too much time. I have a meeting to plan our strategy for tomorrow. It is too late. I've got to go. I've had a wonderful time telling you about my adventures, but we've got to keep at it because we're right at the end. And if we don't do the things that they had advised from England, those women weren't all that ladylike over there. Mrs. Pankhurst taught them to carry banners and to go to jail and to put on food strikes and not to be such sweet things as they had been before. So we're going to win the vote for women by not being ladylike. Thank you for listening.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Our closing hymn is We Belong to One Another by Amanda Eudice Kessler. Please feel free to sing as the Spirit moves you, again with a mask, and stand in body or spirit and join us in singing We Belong to One Another.
We belong to one another, to each other we are bound, as we build a world together, full of joy that we have found. What we are, we owe to others. When they need us, we respond. We belong to one another, and we hold a common bond. We rely on one another at the dawning of our days, when we learn from those around us how to live in loving ways. As we grow, we need each other and the gifts that we can share. As our lives come to their ending, how we need each other's care. We give thanks for one another, for each heart and hand and face. We are grateful for the blessings that infuse our lives with grace. May we offer our abundance as we're given. May we give in our thanks for one another. May we help each other live.
Please Be seated. Our benediction is composed of more words of Olympia Brown, which are also in our hymnal number 578, titled The Great Lesson. We can never make the world safe by fighting. Every nation must learn that the people of all nations are children of God. You may say this is impracticable, far away, can never be accomplished. But it is the work that we are appointed to do. Sometime, somehow, somewhere, we must ever teach this great lesson. And namaste, amen, and blessed be. And I want to thank all of the people in the worship committee who worked to present this service, which honors our Universalist foremother, Reverend Olympia Brown, during this Women's History Month. For those of you who would like to stay in the sanctuary for 10 to 15 minutes to share some discussion or observations from the service, please remain in the sanctuary or online. And please be aware that the comments will be posted online. For the rest of you, you are now welcome to adjourn to the parish hall. So is there any? Is there anyone that either has a question or a comment? Bill?
One of the things that becomes a lot of fun every now and then on being a Unitarian or a Universalist is that it came at a time when people thought that they were making great strides, but there's this thing called Overton's window, which just says, oh, well, that's been enough change for a while. We need to just cool our jets for a while. Not that they had jets back then, but yeah. It's like, oh, we've been quite reasonable. We need a generation or two to make the next push. And then there will be this voice and saying, so we couldn't possibly ordinate a woman, a Black person, we can't free a Filipino. They're not ready for self-rule yet. And there will always be this quiet, well-dressed person in the background who's got a lot of fire, a lot of grit, and about, 3 times the, you're looking for that excuse to treat them as being this will be nice, talk to me this time next century. And there are these people there that say, nope, now this Thursday is looking good. Ordinate me, pay me, even wages. And that little edge that comes where, if you say, I like it how they support each other, although the thing with women and Blacks has often been played against each other. It's the whole thing that says, well, dude, I already ordained a Black person. I'm not going to commit complete political suicide and ordinate a woman to boot. And meanwhile, the guy's going, quick, I got to play these two off against each other, because if they both get on the same page, I got problems. But this voice that just says, no, this Thursday. And all of a sudden you realize that since you were already okay with, you break down the slavery, you break down some of the things that kept people away, you suddenly realize, well, crap, now I have to budget time, energy, politeness, kindness, all of these things I didn't want to spend. And now all of a sudden I have to be nice to a larger chunk of the world. And then the Thursday after this Thursday, you realize, wow, that was only hideously painful, not fatal. We can build and do bigger. And when you got someone like Olympia Brown, this time next Thursday.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I'd like someone to define for me the word ladylike.
I'm sure Olympia Brown would have a different definition than, obviously, than her instructors. She doesn't mention it in this because the time in which she, in which she's speaking, it hadn't occurred yet, but that after this, part of the strategy of the suffragists was to go to the White House, and they chained themselves to the fence, to the railing that was outside the White House by the gates. And I just wanted to let you know, she was one of those women at that elderly age. She was one of the women who went out there and followed Pancras' suggestion that you've got to, you got to ratchet it up. You've got to, you have to be bold. You have to, and so she was one of those women who did that. No, she did not. And I think it's because of her elderly age. I think they realized that kind of how that would look in the press. But she, and I loved the part where where she talks about the Unitarian churches, the Unitarian, in terms of allowing her to ordain her and to let her go through the program and everything else, that nope, I don't think that time is, just like you said, I don't think it's time yet. This Thursday is not ready. And I think you caught it from her, that even though she went through everything, the head of that, seminary was not going to put her up for ordination. She was allowed to complete it, but it was on her own that she went to the Universalist was having this, a gathering and association, just like we have a GA every year, and they will ordain ministers at that GA. And so she put herself up, and they saw that she met all the qualifications, so they went ahead. So I just think she's a remarkable woman. I think she's a remarkable role model. And also, I don't know if you put it in perspective, she went through her, the seminary and then became ordained. That was in the middle of the Civil War, 1863. So the Civil War was happening I hadn't quite put that into connection, into that context. In Michigan primarily, and then New York, and then she went to Boston, Massachusetts, and then in part of her, when she would take positions, like she said, one was in Maryland, and so she was able to go down to Washington, D.C. Oh yeah, the other thing she didn't mention is that her big involvement getting in with, obviously you could see she had the predisposition to go in, and fight for women's rights. But it was a meeting that she had with Susan B. Anthony. And so she met and knew and strategized with Susan B. Anthony. And she's one of the, as I said, she was kind of like one of the last people from that, era there that went on, that actually, she was in her 80s, but she actually got to vote, when others didn't. Okay, thank you very much. I hope you, oh, sorry. Okay, come on up.
Too fast for me.
Sorry.
I'm still Nick. Nothing's changed. Well, I've changed a lot. When I was raised in a family where my mother never worked, didn't even have a driver's license until she was like 50. And very matriarch, authoritarian. And then I met Tinka, And she already had a few strange ideas when I met her in high school. But I was drafted and I was gone for 2 years while she went on to a higher university. And when I came back, this was not the person that I left behind. We were going to feminist rallies and doing all these consciousness raising things, and I was just pretty confused through a lot of that. When we got married, we kept our own names, and it was just for me. It was there was a lot of change because it was one thing after another because things were changing. This was 69, 70, 72, 73. But I was a pretty malleable personality. And I just loved her so much that, whatever ideas she had, and it made sense. I had no reason to, really fight it. But I recall, we were in the midst of the whole feminist movement. And it was strange for me. And a lot of the women didn't want men involved. It was like, no, you go away. We're going to do this ourselves. Mm-hmm. So it was an interesting time to grow up for me.
Well, no, Walt.
Yeah, I was struck at the amount of education that both parents decide to put into their daughter. I think that's something a little bit for all of us to remember, because it was atypical for her to have as much schooling, then to go on and keep pressing for more. And yet her father did put up the money. As an example, when I went to school, I had my own ideas of what I wanted to take. And as time went on, I expanded, really took more than what the usual person would take, two 4-year degrees. My dad and some of his friends started grumbling about, when's he gonna, get a job? And that was as a male. So you can imagine for this woman to keep pushing forward and forward in excessive amount of schooling as viewed by the people around her, as I experienced. I think it's a lesson to all of us that when in doubt, perhaps saying, sure, you can have more schooling than what I'm actually comfortable with. Maybe that's always a good answer. Thank you.
Yes. I do want to say that the father actually, in the books that I've read and everything, he put up a little bit more of a resistance than she mentions, but he always came around. It was the mother that really was the driving, supportive part. Both of them were Universalists, though. And it was that kind of a thing. If you could make a logical argument to the father, then, he went along with it. But his first reaction was, no, that's not, that practical, right? And the fact that he was the one that was working and had to put the money out there, for her. So each time she had to show that it would be a good investment.
What Walton said triggered another idea. It's watch the language, Bill, you're inside of a church. Danged if you do, danged if you don't. If he had not put energy into her training, it would have been well, honey, you're just not well founded enough on the fundamentals of what's needed here. Come back another 10, 20 years, which is a way of turning the no into a delayed action, which serves as a no. Mm-hmm. I don't want to deal with this now. And then if she had the training, then the argument would be, well, you're an unusual case because your father gave you an unsuitable amount of knowledge, and you should not, you thus don't represent the norm. Thus, your whole suffragette trip over here is just a pipe dream, and go away and fix me a sandwich. Essentially, each one can be used a lot, and it tends to be used this day. It's a particular trick that is played, and I'm not quite sure I could flounder around. God knows you've seen me do that. But I could flounder around a bit with the idea of when somebody plays a danged if you do, danged if you don't argument. I guess one of the things you can do is to simply state, this is what you'd have said otherwise. So I have you trying to set up a dilemma on me, and you're not setting it up for any good reason. You're doing it to say no. And quite frankly, if you're doing it to say no, then your no is just as instinctive and unreasonable as my yes. Maybe that's the way.
So anyone else? Well, I'm glad we were able to honor her today during this Women's History Month. All right, thank you. See you